All right, so we're going to start by talking about how to break down a visual text and turn it into something manageable. It's very, very similar to what you would do with a traditional written text. There's just some minor variations and also overcoming some initial instincts we have that tend us to steer us in the wrong direction. So the thing to remember about a visual text is it has an author. That author is attempting to accomplish something. Now, maybe it's not profound. Maybe it's simply to entertain. Maybe it's to provoke an emotional response. But they have composed it with an end goal in mind. It is a rhetorical piece. And as such, the same techniques you would apply to a written text are going to apply to a visual. It's just that the language is imagery, which our brain translates very, very quickly. And this seems like an asset, but winds up actually being problematic. Consider this piece. This is a piece by the artist Rene Magritte. It says at the bottom, "Ceci n'est pas un pipe." Translates, "This is not a pipe," which invites the question, well then what is it? There are many things to do with this painting, but on sort of the surface level, we ultimately, hopefully, come to the point where we realize it's not a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. And of course, we all knew that. The reason we're having trouble with it, though, is because the brain doesn't differentiate between the image of something and the thing itself. And this is where it can actually be challenging to analyze visual pieces as opposed to written. All right, so when we start, the very first step is to simply analyze what do we see. The challenge is not to jump straight to interpretation, to not try to immediately solve the riddle, to get the right answer, etc. To actually just name the parts. And it feels simplistic, but it's a really crucial first step. So we look at this piece, and we don't know anything about it, most likely. All we're simply saying is, what do we see here? And then you can spend a few minutes on this. And in fact, it is most effective if you spend more time than you think you need. I don't mean hours, but if you just said, oh, there's some people on a raft and clouds, you're going to miss something because you've gone for the automatic visual translation. Go through it. What do you see happening? Identify there's a mast and it's leaning. There's huge waves. There's black clouds, but also some sun. It appears to be sort of towards the center, but they're obscured by people. We have dark waves on the left side of the frame, etc. Maybe you go into, some people are reaching and pointing. Some people are giving up and despairing. There appear to be some bodies. Now, ideally, maybe you get to the point and you're looking closely enough that you say, wait, what are they pointing at? And you look at the horizon. Up here, you see off in the distance something. Something is on the horizon. Oh, it's probably a ship. These people are trying to signal that ship. You're not analyzing it. You're not saying, what does it mean? You're not looking at the style. You're not looking at what does the author want us to feel or anything. You're just looking at what you see. Once you've done that, now you're going to break it into sections. There's a couple of ways to do this. One is just to go through and say what you see. Break it into chapters. If there were paragraphs, what are the paragraphs? If there are chapters, like it's a book, what are the chapters about? There's a lot of ways you can do it. You can go top to bottom, left to right. Simply look at what seems to go together. If we look down here, this definitely seems like it goes together. There seems to be its own mini story here. This person isn't even looking at what's happening over here. They're cradling somebody who has clearly died, surrounded by bodies. They've given up. They look almost disinterested. That's clearly a subsection. Now, one technique I really recommend trying is what's called quadrants. And it's just like it sounds. You simply take the image and either visually or ideally, if you're able to actually mark something up, you're just drawing it a vertical and horizontal line to break it into 4 sections. Now, not every piece is going to utilize this. This is a very simple tool, though, that can make a lot jump out. Look at what we can see just by breaking it into these 4 quadrants. If we read a text from upper left to lower right, and we start with the upper left, what do we see up here? We see almost no people at all. The ones who are there are obscured. What we do see is darkness. We see waves moving fast. And what's more, look what jumps out suddenly. The waves and the sail, they're headed into that. That's not as apparent on a first glance, but it makes it a more manageable piece. And look now at these diametrically opposed, visually and compositionally, stories: hope, despair. But at the same time, one might argue false hope. That ship is not going to see them. We can't see the ship. They're certainly not going to see these people, but they're trying. They're waving shirts. They're trying desperately to get the attention. Down here, darkness, despair, giving up. Which raises an interesting question. Now we've got somewhere we can go with it. We're not there yet, but that raises, who's the more foolish? Who is the more admirable? And the conclusion, so to speak, then in the lower right, what are we to make of this story down here? It's just sort of carnage, right? So maybe we don't know what to do with that. Maybe we think, well, is that the conclusion? Is that where this is going to end? Right? If we break this lower quadrant into its own story from upper left to lower right, we go from hope to nothingness. Again, though, we are still not interpreting. We are breaking it into its sections. Right or wrong, we could break it into 12 sections, 3. It's not a right or wrong. Quadrants is merely a tool that can be very, very useful. All right, the next piece is one that can be optional. Sometimes you don't have it as an option, but looking at, what do you want to know more about? Do you want to know who painted this? Do you want to know what it's called? Do you want to know survival tips for surviving on a raft? What do you want to know more about? Whether you think it's relevant or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Just explore. But certainly you want to look at the title, The Raft of the Medusa. When was it painted? Who painted it? And maybe now, this is where you would actually explore outside sources. Who was he? Why did he paint it? And then perhaps you start discovering information that is relevant or not. Maybe you find out, so this is based on a real event. You find out more about what that real event is. Does that matter? Does that matter in your interpretation? And so on. At this point, you're just filling in what helps you understand more. If there's a title, it's probably worth exploring, at least analyzing, certainly. All right, the next step then, and again, notice we are still not interpreting. We are just gathering information. We are breaking it into its pieces. Finally, then, we're going to be not finally, but at the fourth step, we're going to be looking at the icons, the diction. Why choose this and not something else? You're not looking for an answer. You're just thinking about. So if this was composed with an intentionality, what if the author had made different choices? And where they placed things, how does that impact the image? So just thinking about, what if the ship wasn't there? What if this little ship up here, this tiny little dot, wasn't there? How would that change the image? What if the skies were clear? How would that change it? Some of it's going to be obvious. Well, if there was no storm, this is going to be they're not going to be any safer, but it's going to be a much less despairing image. What if the wind was blowing a different direction and they were moving to the right instead of into the darkness? And so on. You're just exploring. How would that alter the image? Still not necessarily analyzing based on that, but it's going to give you some interesting information thinking about the choices that this author made, and in making them, what effect are they attempting to have on you? Do they want us to think about the lunacy of trying to reach this ship, or do they want us to see there is always hope? What's making you say that? What is your evidence in this text for either one of those arguments? All right, and then only now do we interpret. Typically what I'll ask you is to do something like this, a quick response. What do you think is happening here? What does the author want us to take away from this experience of viewing the painting? Is it to entertain, so to speak? Obviously, this is a pretty dark painting, but is it just for us to respond to? Does he want us to do something? Is he trying to comment on human behavior? What is this author's thesis? What do they want us to take away? And then finally, usually, if you can, working with a group, piece it together. What does the author want us to feel? What is the author's techniques? Depending on what it is you're being asked to do. But only now, once you have, what do you see? What are the chapters of this piece? What background information do you have? How has the author chosen to compose it? Do you actually move to the stage of interpretation? It will get quicker as you do more and more practice of it, and it will make a huge difference in any text you're analyzing, but particularly with visual text. So I recommend anytime you see visual text, at least some form of this, especially at first, and it will gradually get easier and easier.